Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone, all the guests, to our review of the economy for September. We have a special topic, State Budget 2024. This topic is uncertainty from the United States and the funds for recovery. And these monthly reviews of economy we are doing together with the German economic team. And in order to listen to us in English, please turn on translation.
Translation in English, please select it in the Zoom panel below. Питання до спікерів ви можете залишати як у
The
розділі
questions for
Q&A,
speakers can be left both in Q&A and in chat, and we would like to try to answer to them. First of all, in our first part, we will talk about the major changes in economy that took place in September. And in the second part, together with the speakers who we have invited, we will speak about the state budget. And before we start the presentation, let me ask Oleksandra Azarkhina, who is the Deputy Minister for the Development of Communities. She is on a business trip. She has some limited time today with us. So, Ms. Oleksandra, please, the floor is yours. I mean, the question is, just for their start, the state budget of this year, it is quite evidently focused mostly on defense needs. The other priorities are, of course, downplayed. That's very much a defense budget, in my opinion. So what challenges you see this for your work? How would you address them in 2024? Many thanks, Yuri. Many thanks for being able to join you. Yes, 100% this I'm, as the citizen of Ukraine, I would agree that all the resources should be aimed at our defense. Of course, we have this as an argument for the internal audience that the recovery, that is the process of investment in some infrastructure objects, is of course also part of our resistance, because this is absolutely related to our economy, to its possibility to generate taxes, and taxes, it's also the ability to pay salaries to our defenders. So these things are quite related. And if we're looking at which way this recovery is unfolding, 2022, which didn't have these funds for recovery, this was the year when we had projects for survival. This was really connected with some critical bridges, with the liberated oblasts, when we had the first year of the full-fledged aggression, and this focus was very much similar to us, to prevent humanitarian crisis inside the country, and secondly is of course the prevention of the world food crisis. That's why we concentrated on the logistics in order to provide for our export. This was year 22. Year 2023 gave us the possibility to touch on social and critical infrastructure. We are also here we are suffering from the new challenges. We see that a lot has been given to the production of energy systems, recovery of energy systems, production of water pipelines after the Kakhovka Dam was blown up. So we built this methodology of prioritization. We are actually finalizing this together with the experts from the World Bank, and in our focus, we had these basic services that should provide for the livelihood of the people. Next year, we are trying to adapt the system, having received the experience, which investments would enable business recovery, that would really help the recovery of the economic activity. Because the first question is not only the access to some basic services, which is a must for the return of the people, but it's also about the provision of jobs, that whether we be able to launch all of those projects, not just to eat up funds in the system, but really to make the investment, to make our economy live. So that's where our priorities are coming, where the Vice Premier has presented on the Donors Coordination Platform in Brussels. These priorities were based on our previous works on the report from the World Bank. That's energy, that's transport. We're talking about the municipal infrastructure, the social infrastructure, and the rest. These are the things that we will continue to work further without that part of the funds that we had this year and which we directed to deal with the consequences of the armed aggression. Of course, it will be more difficult for us, but we have to be focused not only on the directions, but also on the procedures. Because we had the ability to put inside the necessary transparent basis. Of course, this basis needs some additional follow-up, but we need to do more. So when we say when the basis has been already put inside, I'm talking about the three things. When we worked with the Fund of Liquidation of the Consequences of the Armed Aggression, we made the issue of digitalization. It was a must. It was like a red ribbon going through the whole of it. That really made it possible to work as a real system. On the 1st of November, a necessary update will be in the system. And we understand that if we go in the same rhythm as we go right now, with the support of the Ministry of Finances and the support of the civil society and a lot of our colleagues in the government, then we will get the best answer about accountability and transparency. And that's not only the question about some economic feasibility, that's the basic issue of the interstate fundraising. There will be no funds if we don't provide transparency and accountability. The second aspect on which we're working that is very much connected with the independent methodology of prioritization. So using some formula, we have made the possibility to evaluate various objects. We are planning to aid to this object analysis, also the necessity for the comparison of this investment with the program documents, either at the level of the regions and communities or at the level of the ministries. Of course, we have some black swans that we need to work with. Some things, of course, are ad hoc, but if it's more or less planned, then it has to be more or less in one idea. That's very much is aligned with the work of the government and with the update of the state strategy. So we have this unique chance to synchronize all of it. And the third element, the first one was digitalization, the second is the methodology of prioritization, and the third, we did maximum to make sure that the communities would have the possibility to initiate the projects of recovery. We understand that the communities have to be the leaders of this recovery. They should have the recovery start from them. Definitely, their work has to be in the framework of the overall state program. That's why we have a lot of alignment with all the plans for the recovery and the development of regions. This will be sent to the government, and this is like a bottom-up approach from Hromadas, from communities and up. Of course, I have given you a lot of information. Okay, what I want to say? I want to say that the foundation is put inside, and it's very important for us to keep it. And when we say that we don't have the money, enough money for the recovery, that's a very fair comment. But those good practices that we have worked with the partners, with the communities, it's important that they would be remaining. That's a certain discussion regarding institutions, and that's what we're talking about, not only about the liquidation fund, which we are planning to develop and to have it as the budgetary facility in the framework of the Ukrainian budget that would work according to some special rules. We have to make some reference that there is the registered amendment, which was filed by Olena Shulyak. She was working with our reforming expert team. She was working on that amendment, and the discussion on this amendment, we as the active supporters together with Minfin, with IMF, because IMF is quite peculiar about their relationship to the out-of-the-budget funds. Okay, we don't want to shatter the overall architecture of the finances, but we need, in any case, to provide for the transparency of all the processes. And, of course, the prioritization that would not only be granted, not only on ad hoc challenges. Oksana, you have just a few more minutes. So that's very much clear. So we have initiated a joint product with OSR in order to relaunch our DFRR to make sure that it would really meet all the objectives of the regional development. It should also be based on some digital instruments, and we also understand that it will not work next year, but we have to make everything possible that we would have a ready reform, comprehensive with all the calculations. And the third is what we call the road fund. It has become a very big victory of Ukraine, also of our predecessors, because this was the fund that has allowed to organize investment. And until how this fund was developed, we were able to invite Eurobonds. This was a big victory for Ukraine. And it's important, again, not to forget the institutionality of these things. So that's most important message from me. We have the dialogue, and we understand the more of such things we will be able to implement, either through digital instruments or through some other instruments, in the way how it is connected with the prioritization, the more success we will have as the country. So that was a short intro, and thank you for the possibility to speak. Thank you, Oleksandra. Summarizing what you said, that's fine-tuning of this landing strip for the direct funneling of these funds for the recovery once they're available from the state budget. Of course, after the war is over, or after the acute threat is over. And of course, it will depend on the outside donors, also the liquidated assets. Then we would like to come to some intro from Gary Polushkin, who is the project manager. Gary, please, the floor is yours.
Many thanks. My name is Gary Polushkin. It's a great pleasure for me as project manager for Ukraine of the German economic team to introduce this today's webinar. The German economic team is an economic advisory project financed by the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and has been active in advising the Ukrainian government and state institutions for more than 15 years. And this webinar provides an important opportunity to discuss the state of the economy, which is a regular part of this webinar, as well as today's very important topic, the state budget for 2024. Russia's full-scale war has been causing extraordinary changes and challenges to Ukraine's fiscal policy and strategy. The war-related factors are going to restrain the economic development this year and also the next year, and thereby drafting a state budget is subject to various challenges. For example, reduced tax revenues, large expenditures for military and security resilience, expenditures for economic recovery, at the same time rebuilding of social critical infrastructure, and obviously the questions of financing by Ukraine, by the IMF, by the EU, the US, and other partners. And in this context, I'm very delighted that the Center for Economic Strategy has invited such very profound experts that can put forward their emphasis on these challenges. I look forward to a very interesting discussion and giving back the floor to Yuri, who hosted today's event.
Thank you. І зараз я передаю слово моїм колегам.
Okay, thank you very much. Gary, I will pass the floor to Maxim Samaluk, who will start our monthly review. Maxim, the floor is yours. Welcome all the members, all of the participants of our online event. Let us start our monthly review of the economy, and let us start with the aspects related to the war. What was happening at the front? The active hostilities are continued in the south and in the east of our country. On the 21st of September, for the first time in this season, the Russians shelled the Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Unfortunately, everybody is expecting that such shelling will continue in the future. We will talk more about it in this presentation. Also, we have more coming through the maritime corridor. It's happening by Ukraine without the engagement of other countries, nor Russia. Several dozens of vessels have already gone through this corridor, and hopefully we will increase our capacity in this. A few words about the macroeconomic trends. In September, the state statistics has published the official information about the growth of GDP in the second quarter of this year. For the first time in Greece during the full-scale war, it grew immediately by 19.5%, but we have to understand that such significant, seemingly significant growth, it's compared with a very low base of comparison, because we're comparing the second quarter of 23 with second quarter of 22, when we had the biggest fall of GDP. Nevertheless, the growth of GDP is a very positive indicator. NBU has forecasted that it would grow by 18.1%, but it actually grew bigger. Also, in September, we have some better expectations from the business based on what NBU is doing. The business expectation index grew to 50.1. That is exceeding the neutral level of 50 point. That means that the majority of the companies which were questioned by NBU have more positive rather than negative expectations. Only the entrepreneurs who are working in services, they were the only ones who had the negative expectations. The construction companies' outlook slightly decreased, while it still stayed positive, while trade and industry companies improved significantly their expectations. The factors that help this better expectations, they are about the recovery of production, implementation of new supply chains, and much lower growth of costs that actually positively affecting all the businesses. A few slides from the sectoral analysis, what was happening in separate sectors of the economy. Most importantly is that everybody's paying attention, everybody's looking at is actually energy. In September, the export of electric energy from Ukraine was quite high in a very constant manner. 110,000 megawatt hours we were able to export, while the imports was much less and accounted for only 24,000 megawatts. We also have the situation that gradually the energy blocks are finalizing their repairs. That has allowed, together with the good weather in September, to prolong the export season and to earn some money on that. In October, in the first days of October, we can see that a much more cold weather is influencing energy, and the volumes of exports decreased a little bit. But again, we are not importing so much as we were importing in the summer when our power stations were on repairs, and that's very good. Also, some final preparations for the difficult winter are coming, because we have much less capacity, much less strength after the previous year's attacks. Nevertheless, the repairs are finalizing, and Ukraine has accumulated a sufficient amount of natural gas. Nevertheless, we do have certain problems with coal. We're still missing some 500,000 tons in order to come into the season with more sure, and it may be needed that we would need to burn a more expensive gas in order to provide for the proper work of electric stations. In September, we had the less production at the metallurgical companies versus August. And the key problems here is logistics. Practically all metallurgical companies are saying that the key obstacle in order to bring the work of those companies who are remain on the controlled territory and who are working, actually the biggest obstacle is the impossibility to export by sea the products of metallurgical factories in order to grow the production at least to the levels of 2021. The temporary maritime corridor could be a temporary solution because some vessels who were coming into the Odessa port, they were coming exactly with the idea to export the metallurgical products. So we hope that we will be able to increase the use of this corridor in order to expand the metallurgical production to those levels that would allow in this situation to be available. And once again, in the agriculture, a huge problem is still logistics. The temporary maritime corridor is also very important. It has not shown its full potential. Some minimum 17 vessels have left the Odessa Oblast by the Black Sea, loaded with various commodities, including grain, metallurgical products. And this quantity keeps rising almost on a daily basis. Nevertheless, Russians are not able to close this pathway, but they continue to regularly shell the grain and the port infrastructure of the Odessa region. And we can see that the amount of exports, we have the record level to some 2.2 million tons. In September, it was slightly less. It's the 9 million tons. Apart from logistics, we also have some good harvests. Last month, we talked about good harvests of grains, and that was forecasted by all key stakeholders at the agrarian industry. Now we have the information from the Ministry of Agriculture that the buckwheat will also be having record levels. Nevertheless, again, how it will affect the prices and how it will influence logistics, because it has to be stored and has to be transported. Let me pass the floor to my colleague, to Maria, who will continue with the review of the monetary part. Welcome, colleagues. We can see me, and the monetary policy of Ukraine. Let us start with the information that NBU moved to a flexible exchange rate. This is connected with some big progress in downplaying the inflations, and the regulator controls to control situation at the foreign currency market and remains the key player on it. So the rate is changing, and it has moved to a regime of managed exchange rate flexibility. So the official rate is defined by the transactions on the all the citizens are able to continue to buy and sell as before. In September, there was some small further devaluation of hryvnia. The international reserves of Ukraine declined by 1.7%, reaching 39.7 USD billion. This was to a certain balance between Ukraine's FX market, partially compensated by international aid flows, but not fully. So the level of international reserves still remains quite a lot, and it will be enough for the 5.3 months of the needs. NBU cuts key policy rate to 20% from the mid-September. The further deceleration of inflation has allowed to further decrease the key rate. The yield of one-year hryvnia war bonds gradually declined to 17.6. At the end of September, average rate on retail remained quite the same for 3 months deposits and 12 months retail deposits, 14.2 and 14.4 correspondingly. In September, inflation declined and the growth in consumer prices decelerated to 7.1% in year-to-year, while in monthly terms, prices increased by 0.5%. If we look more deeply, we can see that the inflation continues to slow down through the less pressure from business, optimization of production and logistical chains, and the better expectations for inflation and exchange rate. And there is the increased rate. In general, the overall growth of prices were significantly lower versus the forecast of NBU, which was published in the inflation report for July 2023. There was many more offers for the vegetables and fruits and better harvest of grains and oilseeds. These factors in the conditions of limited export capabilities, they influenced the prices. Also, let us analyze the banking sector of Ukraine. If we look at the situation, how the situation was in August, in hryvnia, the amount of deposits was the same as in July, but in September they continued to grow. All types of loans, except FX retail loans, have gradually increased in volume. Most of the lending still occurs under the affordable loans in the 579 program, first of all in agriculture and trade. Loans granted within this program still comprise 1/3 of the hryvnia corporate loans portfolio. The share of non-performing loans in the banking sector as at 1st of September 2023 was 38.5%, which is 0.8 percentage points lower than on August 2023. August 1st, 2023. That's all from my side. I am passing the floor to my colleague, who will tell us what is the news regarding the fiscal center. Thank you, Maria. Let me share my screen. I hope you can see it. You can see the screen itself. Yes, we can see it. First of all, exactly about the foreign financing. Let us talk about it. In September, Ukraine received the equivalent of $2.9 billion. This was, in the first place, the loan financing from the EU, as well as Ukraine received the next grant tranche of $1.25 billion from the United States and some $100 million from the UK that were channeled through the World Bank. And in the future, we can see that the main donor remains the European Union. On the second place is the buyers of bonds, of domestic bonds, and then the United States. Today, the needs in financing that include the deficit and the needs for the repayment and service of debt They are $42.4 billion. We have received so far $32.6 billion so far from the foreign financing, which has so far allowed us to refrain from the monetary financing of our own deficit. And most likely that the significant number of needs, the financial gap of 6.3 billion, will be covered mostly with additional issues of domestic bonds. If we look at the revenues in September, you can see that they continue to steadily grow. So we will look at it without the seasonal revenues from the corporate tax. We can see that the growth continues. And in this month, the main drivers was the excise, which was expected considering the changes in the tax legislation. Apart from that, we have had more revenues coming from rent, subsoil rent, and the PAT tax. If we look at the expenditures, we are looking here in the first place. We're looking still at the August indicators. We can see that the expenditures for defense remain stable. This is the biggest dynamics for growth. It's actually the expenditures for the governance. 52 billion was spent in September. Out of them, 31.6 billion. The vast majority was for the debt service expenses. Out of them, 20.5 billion for the internal debt, 11.1 billion for the external debt. And the 16.6 billion was the transfers to the local budgets. Regarding the rest of the expenditures, we don't see any significant changes. We can also note that through the growth of governance growth, first of all, since the beginning of the year, the defense expenditures were less than 50% from all expenditures. But in any case, over the year accumulated, these expenditures are actually more than half of what is happening with our local budgets. The local budgets continue to accumulate profit at the expense of having more revenues from the tax. And actually, in August, the local budget revenues increased to 63.9 billion hryvnia. There was a lot of discussion in the previous several months. What will be the budget code, how the budget will look like for the next year. So they were around the fact whether it would make sense to funnel PAT from the monetary provision of the military into the state budget, in essence, to stop to compensate it into the local budgets. So, okay, let's move to further to this short overview of the budget 2024. I will go over it quite quickly in order to have more time left for our guests, for our discussion. So you can see at the moment that we're talking about the data still until the consideration. The parliamentaries have filed a lot of amendments, and situation can change, but not that significantly in terms of revenues and in terms of expenditures, because the fiscal situation and the security situation, they are actually overlapping. They are triggering significant limitations to how the state can behave with its revenues. So what concerns the revenues, we expect that in the nominal values, they will grow by more than 26%, and the main drivers would be here VAT and PAT. We will talk more about it on the next slide. If we can compare it with 2021, the draft budget of 2024, in terms of the projected revenues in dollars, it still lacks some 12%. And we have to understand here that the factual picture would really be different, not because it's very difficult to forecast the revenues into the budget because of such a big uncertainty, as well as some exchange rate uncertainty. But apart from that, we have to understand that we don't have, the government has not put inside the outside financing, granted one. So we hope that it will be still coming to us in 2024, because the grants are really decreasing the burden that we need to serve. We will also pay attention to it. And apart from that, the factual revenues of the budget institutions, there will also be most likely much more. We will look at that as well. So if we look at this waterfall, you can see the growth in revenues, plan to plan 2023-2024. Of course, we can see that this is, first of all, PIT. And it's very clear here that the main contribution was to be coming with the military PIT that may be funneled not to the local budget, but to the state budgets. And the consumer tax, as well as the corporate profit tax. The question is whether these objectives are realistic. Of course, it will very much depend on the security situation, on the market situation, on the way how the exchange rate will manifest itself. And with the circles, I have shown you the fact of 8 months 2023. It's 413 billion hryvnia. So that is basically the security assistance. It is directed to the defense needs. And whatever we see put inside in the budget of 2024, at least the dynamics, we hope that it will be coming, this grant assistance. That's also a factor that should be taken into account. And irrespective of this significant growth of tax revenues in nominal terms, if we look at the share of the nominal GDP, it remains within some good civil norm. And this is very much justified, because the growth of the tax burden, it's also a pressure which business in the conditions of war would not always be able to afford. If we're talking about the expenditures of the budget, that's our third full consecutive war budget for Ukraine, with defense and public order expenditures. And these two types of expenditures are dominating the state budget breakdown. We can see that for year 2024, the defense and the public order remain, compared to the revenues to the budget, without the foreign grants, remain quite significant. So we can't expect any significant changes in this respect. This is the comparison of the dynamics of various factors, contributions. You can look at it at some growth that is coming from the expenditures to serve the debt. That's quite significant. That's also the interest for the loans of IMF, and also the services, the serving of the, this is the payments for the domestic bonds. If we talk about the needs on the additional financing in the dollar in the dollar dimension, we have the budget gap of $38.3 billion. That's 20% of GDP. Again, it is very much comparable with our own revenues. Apart from that, we also have the repayment of debt, both internal and external. Therefore, the overall needs in financing, we evaluate at $52.9 billion, and the total expected borrowings would be from the same sources as this year. That is, this will be the local borrowings. This is the loans from the EU, from the US, from other international institutions, but we have to understand that we again have quite a big uncertainty whether we will get this financing. Because of it, as of today, we don't have yet the final confirmation for the EU facility for some 50 billion. And in the same way, we can see the political events in the United States, which also add to some uncertainty to which to how sustainable will be the support of the United States next year. If these needs we will not be able to cover with the inflow of the donors' monies, then we would once again need to do some monetary financing of the part of these needs. Let us say a few words about the consolidated budget. We can see the significant decrease of the capital expenditures, which are in the relative dimension are not that significant, but we can see another decrease of 42% versus the plan of the previous year. And that's also the situation which is negatively affecting long term on the productivity, on the business environment in the country. Therefore, naturally, it's very much clear that, again, we are refusing from some capital expenditures, prioritizing the defense. That's all. That's where we would like to end our short overview of the economy for September. And now I would like to pass the floor to Vladimir Tsembel, who is the Secretary of the Budget Committee, who is the member of the Parliament. Vladimir, good morning. In the first place, I would like to ask you how you actually evaluate that legislative process that is now taking when we are looking at changes in the budget code. When we see this, how do you evaluate the initiatives of the deputies, people's deputies, their quantity and the relationship with the possibilities that the state has for the next year? Thank you for the possibility to talk. What concerns the budget of 2024, what you have said in your presentation, actually there is not much to add because your presentation has been quite comprehensive. What concerns the changes, I will start with the changes that we have in the budget of this year that we have adopted with the Verkhovna Rada. That's the additional 317 billion of million expenditures at the expense of increasing the debt. In this law, we had a lot of initiatives, but even this amount of 303 billion for security, that's the maximum that we can reach with our own resources. And that is the amount that is also confirmed by our international partners. That is very much necessary. That is much mostly for salaries in accordance with those legislations and decrees that were adopted. But there is quite some smaller amount that we would need for the development. So definitely we applied with a lot of amendments and a lot of well-grounded amendments. The motivation of this parliamentaries was different. Some had this motivation just to get access to the tribune. Some deputies believed that it would be possible to reach some additional increase, but again, in the process of learning that, we have understood that it's probably not that possible. I've also applied some amendments in order to increase the expenditures for defense, where we have more income tax coming. I mean, we have fulfilled by 100% with 9 months the corporate tax revenue. So we do have overfulfillment. In some there will be underfulfillment. So my message is that in 2023, that law that was sent by the government, it's balanced. It's the maximum that we can have until the end of the year. So in the overall structure of expenditures, we will come to a bigger amount than what is planned at the moment for 2024. What concerns the other draft law, what we have for the PAT, it's a very surprising situation there, because we all understand that we will be able to finance the security and defense at the expense of the internal resource. So 100% of this money is sent to defense. The only additional resource that we can send is actually this military PAT. It's 100 billion this year, it's 96 billion next year. It's our internal taxes. These are the taxes that are paid by the military, that we, without violating any agreements, that we can send to the sector of security and defense. My expectation that all the parliamentaries, especially from the fractions that were insisting during the last several months to increase the defense, but there was quite a lot of resistance, and that option that was finalized, that we are now looking at in the Verkhovna Rada, it doesn't have any significant support. It foresees that some 45% will be sent to the state special connections, to drones, 45% for the production of ammunition, and also some expenses for the military units who are paying this PAT. So what concerns my evaluation, I think it's a good initiative, and that's the resource that we have found. I'm also talking to the members of the Budget Committee of the European Parliament. They were hinting to us themselves, colleagues, search for the internal resources, and one of the resources, this could be the resource of the local budgets, which I remind you, it's not less versus the previous years. I mean, 2021, the pre-war year, while the expenditures of the state budget, apart from the serving the state debt, so if we take out all the security expenses, all the expenditures that retain to IDPs and the ones that relate to serving the debt, our expenditures have decreased. So my evaluation of this law is quite positive. The evaluation of the process, okay, I want it to be a little bit faster, because we are all waiting for this. Thank you, Volodymyr. This hot discussion around financing these local budgets and PAT. In principle, both sides that are supporting these main positions, they understand and they share the responsibility and the necessity for the main priority is to provide for the defense forces. But one position is that it's better to do it either centralized through the state budget. The other position says that the local communities, they can better address the issues. They're much more flexible. They better understand what is necessary. So it's a little bit the philosophical question. I would like to ask you to reply how you see it. This additional reserve of the local budgets, should it be spent on defense either centrally, or we should rely on the flexibility and the adaptability of the local communities. How do you see it? This position is very much clear. Really, in practice, we see that, of course, the communities can react much faster. That is true. But also in practice, we can see that in various communities, from 5 to 45% of the military PAT tax was spent on security and defense. We are now introducing the mechanism that 100% of this PAT tax will be spent on defense and security. Of course, we are losing some speed, but we are providing for the 100% usage of this tax for the defense. But what concerns the flexibility, we are still planning to send back some 10% to the military parts. So the Cabinet of Ministers would like to develop a mechanism that at least 10% of the flexibility should be remaining. So until 45% the communities have spent, but it's been even 20% in some communities. So I would still support the first scenario when it's done on a centralized manner. Let us move further. I would like to ask you to remain for the possibility of some discussion, and maybe there will be some questions from our listeners to whom you may be able to reply. And let me pass the floor to Oleksandra Betliy, who is the senior expert of the Institute for Political Consultation. Oleksandra, the microphone is yours, and open up your question. Please share your views regarding the budget of 2024. What is striking you? Which changes? Which expectations and which concerns you may have, what we should look at. I'd like to welcome everyone. Of course, a lot has been said about the budget. I'm trying to concentrate. Okay, regarding the definitions, this is really the budget of defense and security, but with a lot of homework. As Yuri has mentioned, we will have a huge dependence from international assistance. In our revenues, if it's possible, I would like to show you one slide. It's in English, but that's the 2023 without the updated plan that is being discussed. But we can see that next year, this year and next year, we have very, very few of our resources that almost we can't finance it ourselves. But once again, we would need reforms. That once again is very much clear. If we are spending so much funds, we are to spend them very effectively. We have to complete the judicial reform in order to spend funds effectively. What we have in the result, we have some sources. We used to have some sources from taxes and the domestic borrowings. If we don't get the outside financing, we will have at risk all of these state functions. Of course, we will not be able to finance some parts of it. Of course, we will need to pay some pensions and salaries. Then we will not be able to finance enough security and defense. In order to get international financing, we, in reality, in our indicators for next year, we planned $42 billion. We have to take them somewhere. We have to do our homework. We have the memorandum with IMF, and we have some structural indicators which we should do. The structural indicators, this is something that's not they wanted, but it's very much needed for us, that the resistance and resilience of our system would remain. This macro assistance that we have, it will be changed to Ukraine facility. Of course, there will be another homework there. There will be reforms that need to be done related to the corporate governance, also the reforms in the sphere of energy. Again, this is not up to our international partners. It's necessary that we would remain resilient and sustainable, that our economy could develop, and we could really become the full-fledged members of the European Union. So next year, the minimum plan for everyone is to continue to pay taxes. We all have to concentrate on the fact that we are making reforms. We, as the civil society, we are promoting this, we are stretching our hands, but the implementation must be done by the government and the decision has to be adopted by the parliamentaries. There should not be populism here. The correct decisions should be adopted. Also, what I wanted to say when Ms. Oleksandra said in the beginning, she said a lot about the budget for recovery. I will share in this chat some information related. We will have next Wednesday the good event together with the Center of the Economic Strategy about recovery. And I would like to say that now the budget is very much cut to a certain extent, but it does exist. So we can't say that it doesn't have financing, because partially this is explained that when we have in the social part, we have some programs which are financed by the World Bank. There are some programs which are financed by the European Investment Bank. So not the full amount is put in the budget, because in the budget we put the minimum which was confirmed. We have some divided amounts, etc. So if we spend funds effectively, we will have more financing next year, the financing. Historically, we have in Ukraine, we had the problem with the very low utilization of various loans. And that's another big problem. That's another homework of Ukraine, which we are also writing down in the IMF program. It's the increase of the efficiency in managing public investments. Of course, the money for the recovery is little, but they will be there. And if we're talking about the fund for the liquidation of this armed aggression, and it has financed a lot this year, so what is left is the source of financing is the usage of the frozen Russian assets. We have to launch the proper management of these resources, and that's our resource for the recovery. Once again, that is another explanation when we're talking about some good reforms, because they are important not as such, but they are important for our fiscal resilience, for our fiscal resistance. And it's also important to recollect here that when we are saying about the recovery and what was said by Oleksandra, most importantly is that we would have the transparency, we would need to have the prioritization and the efficiency. So this dream system is very much important, and those projects which are financed from other sources, they also have to be transparent. We have at the moment the black hole. We are planning 44 billion hryvnia into this. This is the funds for some extraordinary situations, but it's also partially some money for the recovery. But with the transparency, it's still a problem. The openness of information is a problem, but this is something that we should work on. And naturally, that the budget will be difficult and the budget process will be difficult. But again, I believe, I really hope to Minfin and to Verkhovna Rada to fight for these amendments and to really approve the realistic document. This process is still ahead of us, and we will continue to follow it and try to shed light to the activity of the parliamentaries, both as constructive and destructive, because it's important what we will be putting inside into the next year, considering all this uncertainty. Thank you very much, Oleksandra. I would like to pass the floor to Betty Childers. Miss Childers.
The main question I want to ask you is about the support, the financial support of United States to Ukraine and its prospects in 2024. Could you please give your opinion on well, actually, what are the prospects of this support? What are the main factors behind it, which depend on Ukrainian authorities and which depend maybe on the political process back in the United States? What's your view?
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Betliy Childers. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Look, I unfortunately, we're in a very challenging political time in the United States. I don't know how closely you're following the race for Speaker in the United States House of Representatives, but the candidate who the Republicans nominated earlier this week actually dropped out last night. And so right about now, actually, it's just now 10 o'clock in the morning in the United States, the Republicans in the House are meeting again to discuss, who they're going to try to move forward with next. And unfortunately for priorities for the majority of Congress, look, I mean, we weren't able to get additional Ukrainian funding done with the continuing resolution that was passed 2 weekends ago, but a majority of Congress still does support additional aid to Ukraine. And so I think that the support is there. The challenge we have right now is who's going to lead the Republican House, and are they willing to put a bill on the floor? So I think some things to watch. I would encourage you, the Senate has been on recess this week. I would encourage you to watch what the Senate does when they come back from their recess next week. There are rumors that the administration may push for a large package that would include aid to Ukraine and Israel and border security and a number of other kind of really big priorities that are front and center for the United States right now. And so if they do propose that, does the Senate take up the bill first and then send it over to the House? And will the House, whoever the speaker is, which I could tell you I would, but I truly have no idea where this is headed in the House. So, will that person put the bill on the floor? And I think that's an important question. Jim Jordan, so in the internal conference on Wednesday, Steve Scalise beat Jim Jordan like 113 to 99 votes only internally. But Scalise didn't end up moving to a floor vote because he couldn't get the necessary 217 needed to actually become speaker. So now the question is, will Jim Jordan be nominated this morning? And if so, can he get to 217? And Jim Jordan has said he is not in favor of doing additional support to Ukraine and wouldn't put that to a vote. So, I think that's a big lingering question, unfortunately, is just who fills that leadership gap. And will they put the bill on the floor, knowing it would pass the House? There is still a majority of Republicans who support it. And obviously with Democratic votes, it would pass, but the leadership has to be willing to put it on the floor. So we're in challenging political times. The House can't do anything until they pick a speaker. And as you're probably aware, the continuing resolution that I mentioned that did not include additional support for Ukraine, that runs out in mid-November. So we're just about a month away from being right back where we were a couple of weeks ago, facing a government shutdown. So we have a lot to get done here. I just don't unfortunately have great answers about what it's going to mean. I would again say that I think the majority support is still there. I think it will be fine getting through the Senate. And so the question will be, where does this leadership race in the House shake out? And what does the person who takes the speakership do? So maybe I'll pause there in case there are other questions.
You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Oleksandra. Thank you, Ms. Childers. One more brief question. We see some voices, the political voices in US and also some in Ukraine that the decision about continuing financial support for Ukraine for the next year also depends on the efficiency of use of the funding. Of course, we know that first of all, it's like support of a country which fights the deciding war of first half of the century, which will shape the world further. And so it's not like usual business or investment project. but still we see that there is some focus on this. So I would like you to ask you what is like the mainstream perception of how efficiently Ukraine uses the funding? Is there enough transparency and reporting on these funds from your point of view?
It's a good question. I think the majority of the House and Senate support additional funding to Ukraine, and especially when it comes to military assistance without a lot of conditionality. That said, there are, I think, in the kind of more skeptical camp, concerns about the transparency and accountability of how U.S. tax dollars are spent. Some of that comes from what they hear from their constituents, right? So, these members of Congress have to go back to their districts and, from my conversations with their staff, what they hear are, well, why are we spending money in Ukraine when we can't even secure our southern border? Or, why are we spending money in Ukraine when, the roads in my hometown aren't that great? Or, whatever it may be. I think, unfortunately, sometimes people see it as an either or, we only have money for one thing or another. And so that's certainly a narrative that, politicians have to deal with here and have to go home and be able to defend the reasons that we're supporting Ukraine. And I think most of them, again, are willing to do that and willing to have those conversations. When it comes to the transparency and accountability piece, again, I think there are certain people who are very interested in that. And so but being aligned with what the international community is asking for, I would say, so the reforms that are necessary to continue the process, toward being in the EU. I think there's a desire to stay aligned with the types of reforms that are being asked for, with other partners in the international donor community. And so, I don't know, when we get to whenever we get to the next supplemental and whatever the package looks like, I don't know if it will include additional transparency and accountability language or not. I know that the White House, there's been some things floating around recently of asks that they've made on that accountability. And then, there are definitely conversations on the Hill about how to make sure it's there, because it is important for people to be able to go back to their districts and say, look, like, we're giving the money, but it's being used in a responsible way, and it's being used to help Ukraine win, which I think is a really important thing to keep reminding the American people of, is that Ukraine is winning. I don't think anybody expected, things to be where they are, and maybe it might be hard for people in the United States to see what progress is being made and understand that, that Ukraine is doing quite a bit. And so I think making sure those stories continue to make it to the American public are important as well.
Thank you so much for your insights and sharing your views and answering the questions. Now, I would come to answer which we get in the Q&A section, and probably will address it to Володимир. Перемкнусь на українську мову, перепрошую.
The question is quite important from Anthony Levitas. It's written in English. It's about the administration of the military PAT. Anthony mentions that whenever the communities are getting PAT based on the place of work of this payer, so they're creating these financial chimneys that would take out the financing. But again, for many years, it's been discussed the change of the approach when the PAT will be paid at the place of living, at the place of residence for the taxpayer. That takes out a lot of questions, and this could really improve the discrepancies in the system. So, Mr. Volodymyr, do you have the change of administration of PAT on the table? I know it's quite a complicated subject, and I know that a lot of previous governments avoided it because it's complexity, and now we have even more challenges. But again, looking at how active discussions were related to the financing of the local communities, is there any news? Is there any political forces that are ready to take part in this dialogue to change the administration? The short answer is on the table. I can't say that nothing ready is already on the table. The discussion is permanently being started. I'm personally in agreement with the comments that was mentioned by Mr. Anthony. Back in 2019, with various colleagues from various fractions, we applied for a certain law to make sure that either 100% of the PAT would be paid within the place of residence, or at least part of it. We even had several working groups. This was back in 2019 and 2020, and in the previous convocation, this issue was raised, and we ran into a huge disliking and unwillingness of the Cabinet of Ministers to promote this further. I don't think this is connected to the issue that they don't believe in this idea, because we can see at the example of a lot of countries that it does work. I think it's more connected with the complexity of administration. We have talked with various levels in the state tax service, etc., and we have seen that, yes, there are a lot of problems and there needs real political will. It was simply not there. Then for 2 years, everybody forgot about it. And some 3 months ago, for the first time, when it was raised, the payment of 100% of military PAT, then again, the parliamentaries have turned attention to it. So maybe we would need to at least to look at the possibility, so there would, at least for the military, that the money would go not to where the military part is registered, because a lot of cases the military units and companies are even registering not where they are from, but where they could agree. So this discussion is always up in the air, but still to some deep discussions, some deep decisions we never have approached. Thank you, Mr. Volodymyr, for your answer. I also want to voice the question of Mr. Andrew Kate regarding the factual needs of financing fiscal deficit until the end of this year, considering the changes in the budget which are being proposed. This is the 322 billion hryvnia supplementary budget. Our evaluation, which you have seen in the presentation, it doesn't really include these changes, and it is some $6 billion until the end of this year. So the question which I would like to raise to Volodymyr, and I would like to ask colleagues to comment on it, how you are planning to close this gap, and whether you have, let's put it this way, some alternative ways in case of non-getting or not on time getting of the financing from the United States in the Q4. To reply briefly, some sources which we have foreseen for the financing, I think it's 290 billion, and as you can see, $6 billion. These are the sources where we are certain of. Some 2/3 is regarding our internal debt. This is already on the basis of the forecast that we can be able to fulfill, to additionally borrow. And let me remind you that we have a difference between the internal debt was 0, so 367 we borrowed and 367 we are repaying. So we believe that we can go into a slightly bigger level of borrowings, I think 370, and with the repayments was some less repayment. So we will be able to provide for this at the expense of rollovers, at the expense that we will be able, that we would do some more borrowings with the non-monetary manner. That's regarding the internal. Regarding the external, this is the philosophical question. Of course, we do have the certainty, but considering the situation, including in the United States, etc., we have to be ready to various options, to various ways of development. Thank you, Volodymyr. Would Oleksandr like to add anything? We should, talking about the financing, in factually, on Tuesday, we borrowed some 20 billion from government bonds, and we would need to do more. That 20 billion is a record amount because we had 2 and 3 billion. So yes, there is the risk even on the internal market that means that we would not be able to go down with the rates for Minfin, but Minfin is working to engage non-residents, and that would try to implement some other policies, coordinating it with the National Bank, but that the non-residents would get the right to buy government bonds in online. This could be a big impetus because somebody may jump in and would want to buy our government bonds. That would be very much beneficial for us. The risk of the United States is quite big. So if some decisions would be adopted that would concern the year 2024, we have to understand that the regular grants from the United States into Ukraine, they were not promised to us. I think we received the last grant for the recovery in October, but one more I think is still flying somewhere in the air for the recovery. So the risks are unfortunately high. What we will be doing, that's another question. Of course, it can be whatever you want to be. Something maybe we will be able to cut from other pieces. Let's see how it will be. Maybe we will go to National Bank with some direct financing as we did last year. So the question is, what could be the debt? There could be, maybe there could not be debt, but the key aspect here is this coordinated work of the parliament, the government, something that Volodymyr has told us about the approving changes to the amendments. We really need to work together now in a very coordinated manner. The budget is aimed at the war and it has a priority. Everybody has to understand that. Thank you, Oleksandra. We have some 10 more minutes. Possibly the participants of the discussion would want to add something, to make some last remarks, to summarize something. Please go ahead. Volodymyr, please. If it's possible, a short comment regarding this, and then some summarizing comments. In accordance, I am absolutely confirm what Oleksandr has said. Definitely we would need the contingency plan, and I know the Minister of Finance is thinking about it. So we have to understand that very often we have we see that in some months some bigger amount of payments. I mean, apart from the monetary financing, there are several ways to catch up. So here I have certainty that we will be coping. What concerns the summarizing statement regarding 2024 budget, we have really changed the paradigm of this year. If last year we planned, let's put it this way, for the recovery, and for that we planned a lot of to this year, this time we have approached it very conservative. We had a working group in the budget when we looked at 1,600 amendments, and we were approaching it very conservatively. It's for the first time within the fourth year, apart from the previous year when we had a very shaky process. So this year we have done the minimum number of amendments. No, the parliamentaries' requests, as they often like to do. So we tried to cut down on capital expenditures, and this was actually the same in 2022 when we did sequester. Somehow part of the capital expenses were returned. So in 2024, we again started to cut the capital capexes again. So we have some belief that this budget process is not that complicating, because we're not to satisfy a lot of requests from various parliamentaries from various political groups. But from the other hand, if we manage to keep this fight, I believe that the budget of 2024 will be quite realistic and quite, at least the first steps that we did yesterday, the working group of the budget committee, they really launched it in the proper direction. Thank you, Volodymyr. While you were talking, I returned to the slide on which you can see the dynamics of capexes with this red line that illustrates really well what you said. Oleksandra, I can see that you raised your hand. I just wanted to add a few words to what Volodymyr has said. It's about the alignment of the government and the parliament. When I say the government, I mean all the ministries, that the ministers would really talk about common priorities, not that everybody would take care about their own things. And that understanding that we don't have money in the state, let's not do the ping pong, and let's the budget committee have their say, because very often this increased expenditures, it's coming from these various rollovers. So we couldn't catch here, so let's spend it there. So we have to understand the criticality of the situation in the government, in the parliament, not only the civil society, and some deputies would understand that. Thank you, Oleksandra. Would anyone love to say something else, some more comments? I think we have addressed all the questions in the chat, which I have seen in the Q&A. Good, then let us finalize. I would like to thank so much to all the speakers today who have found time to join us and to share their experience, their expertises, their impressions. Many thanks to everybody who joined us. Let me remind you that we had the topic of state budget, uncertainty of financing, and receipt of funds from the United States and funds for the recovery. See you next time. Please sign up to our social networks in order not to miss the events which we are taking. It's quite a lot of them, apart from this monthly review. And thanks to our German economic team colleagues, wish you a peaceful weekend.